We continue with the discussion of a doll's house essay questions. In the previous video, we tackled one of the questions that talks about desperation and misery. Write an essay showing how desperation causes misery, citing illustrations from Henrik Ibsen's A Doll's House. We talked about how to interpret that particular question, and we came up with the points of interpretation as well as the introduction. Now, in order to watch that video, I'm going to provide a link. You can watch it in the link above, and you can also watch it in the link in the description. Now, in this particular video, we're going to now delve deeper into one of the points, how to write a point that is going to score you full marks in Kcse. In this case, I've picked the point on Miss Linde, but we came up with 5 points of interpretation. We talked about Nora being desperate to save Torvald's life. We talked about Nora being desperate to conceal the secret about the loan that she borrowed from Krogstad. We talked about Mrs. Linde being desperate to save or take care of the bedridden mother and the 2 young brothers. We also talked about Krogstad being desperate to win back respect in town by keeping his bank job or even getting a higher position in the bank. And lastly, Torvald is desperate to guard his reputation. He's so concerned about the societal norms and codes and what people say about him. So all these instances of desperation cause pain to the characters or to characters in the book. Now, we are going to break down Mrs. Linde's points. I have a sample essay, but I also have some tips. I have 5 tips, which is a formula that can help you to score full marks, but does not necessarily mean that you have to follow it to the letter. However, if you do, it helps you to remember the bits that you cannot leave out when you're writing the essay. What I mean is that it's not a fixed formula. All we need to have is the correct interpretation and, of course, textual illustrations from the book. However, I developed this formula together with other paper 3 teachers in order to help teachers and students to understand exactly what the examiner needs from us. Now, a standard paragraph will always have what we call the topic sentence, the first sentence. In this case, let us just remember that the first sentence carries the main idea, or in our case, answers the question. So it must answer the question. You answer the question by mentioning a relevant character. We're going to use Mrs. Linde, who is desperate, or it can be, in some cases, a relevant situation. Like in the case of how desire without limit causes pain to us and our family members, we did not use characters to answer that question. That is a past Kcse question. We used situations like Kino losing his boat, or Kino losing his house, or Kino beating his wife. Those are situations and not necessarily a character. So mention a relevant character or a relevant situation. In this case, we have Miss Linde, and then also ensure that you capture the keywords, because the question basically revolves around a moral which touches on the keywords. The keywords guide you as you try to tackle the moral or the lesson. In this case, we learn that when we are so desperate, sometimes we end up causing pain. The actions we take cause us pain or misery. So that is the moral. We must capture that in the first sentence so that we answer the question. Then we have what we call, okay, after that you move on to the next step of answering the question, where you give details of now the desperation, which is our first keyword in this case, or in some cases the action of the character. You give some details about that. The details must come from the book, and you use episodes where you see evidence of the desperation. What shows that Miss Linde is desperate? What does she say? What do other characters say? What actions does she take that informs us that she is desperate? For instance, jilting Krogstad, the man she loves, for the rich man whom she does not love. That is a clear case of desperation. Next, the next few lines, again, supporting sentences should give now evidence of the second keyword, in our case, the misery or the pain. But you must link You must link the two. You must show the relationship between the two. Don't just mention in a way that seems like you're narrating. Always go back to the question, keep glancing at the question, reading the question, so that you answer the question without digressing or simply narrating events from the book, where you end up having long paragraphs or a very long essay, but you don't score because of the digression. So give details of the second keyword, which is the misery. Again, look for episode where Miss Linde appears to be suffering as a result of the desperation. After you've done that, give us a background information, a few lines just explaining how she gets herself in a situation where she's desperate. What leads to that first keyword, what leads to that desperation, the events leading to that, or the events leading to the situation which we are discussing in that particular point. We call it background information. So important in helping you to score the full mark. After you've given the background information, then you simply conclude the paragraph. So the fifth step is to give us the last sentence which sums up the paragraph. Some people call it the clincher sentence, and it is very important because it shows that you're still on track and it helps you to avoid narration or digression. Now listen to this paragraph. Let me read the first sentence that answers the question. Mrs. Linde is desperate to take care of her bedridden mother and young brothers, and this causes her pain in the long run. That is the answer to the question, the topic sentence. And then this is the last sentence in that paragraph, which we are calling the clincher or the summary of the paragraph. Mrs. Linde's misery arises from her initial desperation. You can see it sums up desperation and misery. All right, so let us look at the rest of the paragraph. Now this is the desperation, evidence of the desperation. Nora wonders why Miss Linde married her husband, yet she did not love him. It turns out she did it out of desperation. Miss Linde's mother was alive then. She was bedridden and helpless. Miss Linde was also had to provide for her younger brothers. She could not refuse the rich man's offer, so she jilted her partner Krogstad. That is on page 14, and you can see clearly that she is desperate. And maybe you can add what we find on the episode on page 86, which is not written here, that Krogstad's prospects were hopeless then, and so since the mother was helpless and the brothers were little, she had no choice but to leave him. So that is clear evidence of the desperation. Then you add that some background information. Her husband died, and she has been a widow for 3 years now. His business went into pieces and he left her nothing, no children, sorrow or grief to live on. Nora feels for her, saying she must have suffered. So we see the suffering right from page 10. All right. So Miss Linde tries her hand in running a small shop and then a small school. Her last 3 years seemed like one long working day with no rest. That is on page 14. So we also give evidence of the pain, the anguish or the agony that she has gone through. Her life is unspeakably empty. So she needs a regular job or something to occupy her thoughts and keep her busy. Her unhappiness makes her so bitter. She is tired of her backwater. That is on page 15. You can already see that we are citing evidence of the bitterness. You don't just mention, evidence of the suffering. You don't just mention that she suffers. You have to tell us what informs you that she's suffering. That evidence is what scores you marks. We continue and say that Krogstad considers Miss Linde heartless, for she jilted him for a more lucrative chance. She tells him that she did it for her helpless mother and 2 little brothers, not for the sake of money. So that is clearly, again, desperation. Miss Linde also feels like a shipwrecked woman, having no one to mourn for or care for. Page 87. The misery is as a result of a desperate decision to marry the rich man. She begs Krogstad to take her back since she needs someone and something to work for. She offers to be a mother to his children when they join forces. That is enough evidence of the suffering. So just give us what you can remember. Maybe you may not remember all the details I've given, but try to furnish the examiner with as enough details on the desperation and the misery. And you see, we have been linking them and we've kept throwing in the keywords throughout the essay. Once you've done that, then you conclude by giving a summary like we did, that Mrs. Linde's misery arises from her initial desperation. That is a complete full paragraph that's going to earn you the full mark. You can ask any questions in the comments if you didn't understand or if you need clarification, and if you also need to add any insight, feel free to do so in the comments. Also, feel free to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. In the next videos, we will discuss the other points that are remaining, and we'll also discuss other questions. We have developed as many as 20 questions. And if you have any question that you need us to help you discuss, you can also talk about it in the comments section. Check out my blog wekati.blogspot.com for more of this insight.